for joining me. So once again, we're seeing a tremendous amount of money being spent in this campaign cycle. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And we're also seeing kind of the same names that come up every 2 to 4 years or so, right, Jess? I mean, when it comes to these large campaign donors.
Yeah, the Hedge Clippers released paper number 64 on Monday that showed just 7 billionaires have poured over $30 million in this cycle's elections in federal and state elections in New York State alone. And with a week out from Election Day, we think it's really important that so many New Yorkers who are seeing the really nasty campaign ads coming across their screens, in their phones, or in their mailboxes are actually because of these 7 billionaires who are aiming to keep Wall Street in control of our elections and public policy in New York State and Washington.
So, Chris, I mean, who are these folks? I mean, for people who follow this kind of stuff and who look at the campaign filings, we see these similar names pop up every year. But who are these folks, and why are they so interested in the political process?
People like Paul Singer, people like Dan Loeb, people like Stephen Schwartzman, the Walton family, Robert and Rebecca Mercer. These are some of the wealthiest people on the planet. They are billionaires. They are spending millions and millions of dollars to buy our elections. They're hedge funders who live in basically a completely separate world from everyday New Yorkers, and they're spending millions and millions of dollars to try to buy our elections.
So, Elizabeth, if you could just give us a sense for what sort of policy outcomes do we see as a result of all of this? I mean, just these guys spend money, and then what happens?
They're threatening to cut Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. They've gone after the ACA in the past. And these are the things that everyday New Yorkers are concerned about. They're worried about taking care of their basic needs, and healthcare is a basic need. People need care. They need to be able to get their medications and not have to sacrifice buying food or paying rent.
So, Jess, all of these guys too, not all of them, but many of them are also supporters of charter schools too. And that's an issue that comes up perennially in Albany. It's something that Governor Cuomo was very much in favor of, and then it's kind of put to the back burner during the campaign season. Do you expect the issue of charter schools to come up once again in the state Senate? I mean, I guess in part depending on who controls the state Senate next year.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with what the outcome of Election Day will be. What we do know is these billionaires have charters on the mind and have kept control in the New York State Senate in particular by funding the campaigns of Senate Republicans who have pushed a charter school agenda. We'll have to see what the outcome of Election Day is to see if those senators who have been supported by these billionaires hold their seats. These 7 folks are huge beneficiaries also to the tax scam that was passed by Congress and President Trump last fall. And we're seeing just a direct, they get the money from the tax scam in their pockets and just put a little bit, which is by millions for them, back into the elections to keep that cycle going. And that's where we're seeing cuts to things, programs that people care about, a pushing of their agenda, charter schools in Albany, cuts to our social safety net in Washington, and more tax cuts for themselves, the billionaire class. Well, everyday New Yorkers are just wondering, where is all of this money coming from and what does it mean to me?
We are seeing this cycle, though, a good amount of money being spent by labor unions, however. 32BJ has gotten involved, the New York State United Teachers Union has gotten involved, 1199. They are funding their own independent expenditure committees or super PACs or whatever you want to call them. They're funding primarily on behalf of Democratic candidates for the state Senate. Has that been an effective counterweight so far at this point, would you say?
I mean, it pales in comparison to the $30 million being put in by 7 billionaires. And keep in mind, these are 7 independently wealthy people who have more money than millions of New Yorkers combined, compared to a teachers union or a union of service employees, hundreds of thousands of members collectively pooling their very small donations to help win an election. It's quite different than 7 billionaires who have a very, putting all of their millions of dollars behind a whole set of candidates to keep perpetuating their own tax cuts.
Chris, go ahead. I mean, in terms of just the amount of money that labor has been spending, there's been a lot of discussion this past year about the impact of the Janus decision at the Supreme Court level. Do you think that kind of grassroots labor organizing has been a little bit more focused this election cycle.
I think this is the big money agenda versus everyday hardworking people. There's no comparison between small dollar donations to labor unions who are fighting for hardworking everyday people and trying to bring people together, to literally the richest people in the world that are trying to pay a lower tax rate than teachers, that are trying to gut our public schools, are trying to cut programs so they can become richer. It is possible to have an economy that works for brown people, black people, and white people, but the divisive, hate-filled, and wealth-fueled agenda of these hedge funders is trying to tear people apart so that we can't have an economy that works for everyone.
Now, Elizabeth, one issue that has come up and could potentially come up again if Democrats take over the state Senate is the public financing of campaigns. Do you feel like that is a possibility even if Democrats have a 2 or 3 seat majority?
Yes, I think that we need to address this absolute disparity between 7 people who are able to flood campaigns pretty much without consequence and push their own agendas, as opposed to, as we were saying before, millions, their wealth is equal to what it would take millions of New Yorkers pulling together to do. And so yes, some sort of campaign finance reform is going to be necessary to combat this.
Jess, is public financing possible with a Democratic state Senate?
Absolutely. I mean, we've had strong supporters in the Democratic conference in the state Senate, including Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who would be likely the leader of the Senate majority if the Democrats take control, has been a lead bill sponsor. Governor Cuomo has put public financing of elections and other campaign finance reforms in his executive budget for years now.
Do you think that's something Governor Cuomo would follow through on, though?
I would think so. After 6 years of putting it in his executive budget and really using the Senate Republican control to say it can't happen with a triple blue state of New York, I think New York is going to be one of the hopes of the country to be able to actually combat and balance out the power of these few wealthy hedge fund billionaires versus the masses collectively creating a government of, by, and for the people. New York can really be a beacon of hope, and I hope they all take that opportunity.
Yeah, during the primary, Governor Cuomo was hit pretty hard from the left, and he won that primary. Do you think that he's going to feel emboldened to not learn any lessons, or whatever lessons may have been learned from that Democratic primary, or do you think he's going to follow through on an agenda like public financing, like campaign finance reform?
If you're asking me,
go ahead.
Perhaps others might be able to speak better to that question, but I feel like there are progressive challengers that are going up against big money candidates like John Faso, like Claudia Tenney, like Sue Serino. Faso, Tenney, Serino, Katko, these are candidates that are funded by big money donors. They are the political puppets of big money donors, and they're in there to do things like protect the carried interest tax loophole that allows wealthy hedge fund billionaires to pay a lower tax rate than everyone else. There's a reason why these 7 billionaires are funding the campaigns of their political puppets, and it's because they're getting a huge payoff.
Go ahead, Jess.
I was just going to say, Governor Cuomo has put in a comprehensive campaign finance reform for a really long time. The thing that has passed has been all of these really good disclosure laws that allow reports like this to exist. We learned today another $1 million spent, right? He's brought sunshine to the big money, but now it's time with the Democratic Senate to bring the people's money collectively into the process and start to balance the scales of these hedge fund billionaires.
Right, and Elizabeth, I don't want to give short shrift to Congress in the fight for control of the House of Representatives, but it's something that we're seeing, as was alluded to, the race in the 19th Congressional District and the 24th and the 22nd. What would you say is kind of the motivating factor here for a lot of voters in these districts at this point? I mean, you've had a lot of Democratic challengers focus on issues like health care. Is that something that's going to be motivating voters out to the polls beyond the money that we're seeing spent in these campaigns?
I think that the very personal need for health care, everybody has someone in their family that needs health care. It touches everyone in a very personal way. I have been in Washington as an activist with people who were literally there fighting for the health care of their premature babies who were born premature. And so they had reached their lifetime cap as an infant. They were a pre-existing condition from the day they were born. And And so it is an extremely personal nature and something over which many people have no control. And as parents age, the need for Medicare and more, Medicare to cover it, and just more care becomes more and more important to individuals. And so that drives people to get to the polls, to get out and talk to their neighbors, and move forward and say, enough is enough. We need representation who will take our concerns to Washington and not just the concerns of the very wealthy.
Okay, well, we will have to leave it at that. I want to thank you all three for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.